Welcome to Reframed. Join us as we explore the concept of redemptive business in our unique context on the African continent.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Reframe podcast series by Ziwani. My name is Chinwe Okpala. I work as a communications professional in the international development space. My journey has been an interesting one. I started with corporates, financial services, FMCG, and now settled into the development space. I'm going to welcome Iphie Chuks-Adizue. She's popularly known as Iphie, and she's a seasoned executive with over 20 years of experience in building global brands across Africa. She currently serves as the managing director of a global citizen, and it's an international advocacy organization that is focused on ending poverty. If it's good to have you here, welcome to the Reframe podcast conversation. This has been a long time coming, and I'm glad that we're finally doing this today. How are you?
I am good. Thank you so much, Chinwe. Really a pleasure to be here. Indeed, it's been a long time coming. So I'm happy we're finally doing this. My name is Iphie Chuks-Adizue, but everyone calls me Iphie. And like Chinwe says, I'm a career professional. I lead Africa's work at Global Citizen. So I'm the managing director for Africa at Global Citizen. It's an international advocacy organization. We're focused on ending extreme poverty now with an emphasis, like in caps. Outside that, I wear many hats. I think for the last 14 years, I've always had something that I do in terms of my purpose work. So right now, it's all cumulated into I run a platform called the Uncommon Woman Movement, Uncommon Woman International. It's about helping career women desiring more from life to actually identify their purpose and birth it without dropping the balls at work or in their homes. A lot of times we feel like, oh, God is calling me to do things and I must, resign from my full-time job. What I've learned in my journey is that sometimes you don't have to, and He's giving us the grace to be able to do that. So I show these women that it's possible, and then I share with them the wisdom that I had learned in my own journey, so that they are able to keep growing in their careers, really doing amazing things. That's essentially me in a nutshell.
That's really interesting. Thank you, Iphie. Can we talk about your career journey? I know you are an economics graduate. You have worked in various fast-moving consumer goods organizations. Can you tell us a bit more about that part of your life?
Yes, sir, definitely I can. So, interestingly, May 9th made it 21 years since I started this journey. So I feel very grown up, if I should say that. I started my career in Procter Gamble in Nigeria. I started out in marketing. So when you look at my 21 years, it's really cut across marketing, sales, media. Spent the first 20 years in the profit space, and then just recently moved to the non-profit development space about a year now. But so starting out my career, I was in marketing, which is essentially brand management. I did that for a couple of years, and then I moved to sales, not by choice. I love to say that God just has an interesting way of ordaining our paths and just really crafting it out. I would never have moved to sales. Never. I was shy. I was timid. Um, I used to sweat under my feet when I'm having conversations with people. But then I was getting married, and my sweetheart was in Abuja. So if you're familiar with Lagos, Nigeria, Lagos is the commercial hub, which is where the offices were. I was getting married. My husband was in Abuja, so I had to move. And it meant either of two things. Either I would resign, but I really loved my job. I loved the people I was working with. I loved the organization. So it was a really tough one. Thankfully, they moved me to sales, which, like I said, wasn't something I really looked at as an option. But if he allowed me to stay in the company, I was very happy. So I moved to sales. I did sales. I ended up doing sales for about 4 years. And in that time, really grew as a person, as a professional, challenged myself in a lot of ways. After a while, I moved back to marketing because at that time I'd gotten married. My husband was also at this point traveling a lot, so he was amenable to me moving back to Lagos since it wasn't like he was in Abuja all the time. Then I moved to Cadbury. Cadbury at that time was bought over by a company called Mondelez. So today it's called Mondelez. In a few markets, it's still called Cadbury. And I was responsible for the cocoa beverages business across West Africa, so Nigeria and Ghana. Prior to when I left Procter Gamble, my last role there was for oral care across West and East Africa. So just in terms of building the business and owning the business. I was in Cadbury for about 2, 3 years. And then I was really desiring more in my career. My career story is a very interesting story because when I started out my career, I just felt it was, you just go to work and, you earn your salary. And I didn't really think that there was purpose for me in my career. And so I found myself desiring more, desiring to grow into a directorship, desiring to grow into C-suite. And after a couple of years, it happened. And so I moved from Cadbury to a company in Nigeria called CAP PLC. They are the makers of Dulux Paints, which is owned by Axon Nobel. And I moved there. That became my first C-suite role. I moved there as Chief Commercial Officer. Totally new industry, never worked there, paint. Um, and for people that know me, I'm not very visual. I always like to say this. I'm not very visual at all. So going to work in an organization that sold paint meant that you needed to be creative. You need to come into a space. You can imagine how the colors would be on the wall. For the life of me, I can't even imagine a dress on me, except the dress is fully on me. So was new and different. But I did that for 4 years. And I remember that was really the first time I went into a role. And beyond saying, oh God, what is my word for this role? The question I was like, God, what do you want me to do in this role? And I did that role for 4 years. In that 4 years, we quadrupled the business in terms of revenue. We tripled the business in terms of profit. We created over 300 new jobs. So for me, that's why what I was telling you about leadership is really very core to me. It's what we can do in the places that we are, not just to bring transformation, but that it continues. And then I'm sure we might get to that story later on today, by some very interesting divine stroke, um, I was moved to the development space. And that's where I've been for the last 18 months. It's been really exciting. Within my role, we are building the creative economy for Africa. When you look at, I'm very passionate about economic development, growth. So when you look at the creative economy, the live music space, Africa is teeming with young people. We love music, we love dancing, it's part of who we are. But when you look at the global live music sector, it's worth billions of dollars. Africa contributes a minuscule value to that. Why? Because honestly, when you look at global tours, music tours, Africa is rarely included in those tours. And it's not because people don't like Africa. They are fans here, they have that. It's because on the continent, we don't have the infrastructure to really plug us into those global touring circuits. And when I say infrastructure, I talk about arenas, I talk about even the people, the capacity, the networks within the continent. And so for Global Citizen, we're largely known, but we are international development organization. We help to bring change, but a lot of people know us for our concerts because that's one way that we work with the young people that are in our system to be able to bring about change. So we know concepts, we know how to do it. We have great relationships with artists. And so looking back for Global Citizen was a case of, what can we do on the continent to actually correct this? And that's how we started a program that's called Move Africa, which is really about building up the infrastructure, building out the capacity, production teams, training people. We started in 2023. This is our third year. We've done concerts in those 3 years and built up. So that's essentially what I lead right now. Very exciting work.
There's a lot for us to unpack, but I think the first question I'm going to ask, extracting all this, is what will you say were the two top risks that you took that scared you the most in this journey, and tell us about it. How did that pan out? Why did you even agree to take it? And what role did your faith play in that?
I think I've taken a number of risks, honestly. Just looking back, like when I tell the story, half the time I'm like, were you really okay? I'm going to share a couple, but I think the first one that really scared me was taking a year off work for my son. And it's not something that, honestly, I would say comes naturally to me at that time, or came naturally to me at that time, because I'm a very work driven person. We get into this thing, we ace it, we're doing great, you know. But at that time, my son was 6 and his sister was 5. That school year, the school had called me and said, "Oh, my son wasn't talking. And he was very, very extroverted. So he was speaking a lot of gibberish. And then the school called me and said, because they couldn't assess him, you know how we do school, you do exams and all those things, he would have to redo that year. And that meant that his sister, who was 5, was going to be in the same class with him. And I was like, oh no, I need to really do something. So that meant taking a year of work. It was a very tough decision. But I took it because I asked myself, even if I grew in my career, I became a VP, and my son could have really become a different person just by some decisions I would make I should have made at some point. How would I feel? And I realized that even if I got to wherever I wanted to get in my career, and my son was still struggling with this, and I knew that there were things I could have done, but I didn't do it. Even if I got to that place, I wouldn't be happy. And so I decided to take the year off work. So that for me was like the first major risk. Second major risk, when I look at it, in the eyes of the world, it will be moving from profit to non-profit. So this development space, totally different. Like, what do you know you're going to do there? But for me, interestingly, I even saw it in the scheme, when I rank the risk, it's still lower. You know why? Because I expressly heard a word from God. And he told me that he was going to move me to the development space and I was going to be Africa director. I didn't know how it was going to happen. So in the scheme of things, it was just me following the word and just following, this is what you said, I'm available. When I got into this space, Global Citizen is very interesting because when you look at the development space, you essentially have people that give grants and you have people that implement the work. Global Citizen is neither of both. We're somewhere in the middle. We're advocacy, we seek grants, we work with implementers, we do have our own projects. So it took a while to understand. And I remember in the first couple of months, it was tough. But every time I just keep remembering, he sent me here. He's not going to leave me. I remember when I was leaving CAP, one of the things my group MD asked me was like, are you sure about this? And I said, I've never been so sure about anything in my life like this. So for me, it's like two examples. The first one was just really me just weighing the options and then deciding to take the leap. The second one, which has really happened a lot more in my recent past in terms of the risk I've been taking, is around instructions and going here and then just doing it.
Oh, that's really interesting. Thank you for sharing. How have these two choices impacted your risk appetite?
My risk appetite, it depends on what exactly, because my risk appetite varies depending on the area of my life. I think when it comes to my career, when it comes to my purpose work, my risk appetite is really high. In my purpose work, for example, today I speak to women. I'm writing books. I'm training. That's not Ifoma many years ago. Ifoma didn't want to be seen. But today, when I look at my purpose work, one of the biggest risks I had to take there was showing up and putting my face out there. I didn't like it. It wasn't me, you know. But I've done it and I've grown in it. So when I think about my career, my purpose work, yes, my risk appetite there is really high. When I think about things like, for example, financial decisions, my risk appetite there is still very low, except I hear it. I think for me, except I really get to understand it and I feel a nudge a divine nudge to do stuff, then I'm able to just go all out. So what it just tells me is that across every area, when you exercise that muscle, it gets stronger, you get more confident. Sometimes it will not pan out as you expected. Um, but if it does, then you grow in those places. So the next question, even as you're asking me this, is these areas I've said that are low, what do I need to do to exercise that muscle more in those areas?
As you were speaking, something came to my mind. When it comes to obedience, we are talking about how your risk appetite is now high when it comes to your purpose work and how it wasn't originally that way due to the nature of the person that you are. And I've realized that when it comes to walking with God in our work, obedience takes different forms, and sometimes what we call humility is actually false and can be pride. God says you can do something, but you're like, no, I'm not cut out for this. My persona does not like to be put in front of the camera or the spotlight. We used to see that as some false form of humility, but it's actually pride. Like God is telling you that you can do this, and you're telling him, no, you're wrong. It's really interesting how the different forms of obedience can happen. I'd like you to talk us through your journey. I know that you did not mention it extensively or at all in your introduction. The Dulux childbirth services. What were you trying to do with managing neonatal and maternal mortality in Nigeria through that?
Thank you, Chinwe, for that. It's so interesting the things that I missed. But Deluxe Childbirth Services really was I like to call it my first more. So remember, I talked about how in my career, interestingly, I started my career, and when I started my career, I graduated best student in my class in university, got into this job that was really competitive. My boss at that time had gotten promoted at 3 years, so I was her first direct report as a full manager. So when I came into my role, for me, it was a case of, oh, you're going to get promoted in 3 years, because you're bright, you're smart, and you have God. But there I was 7 years, I hadn't gotten promoted, and it was really beginning to mess with my head. And I remember one of my maternity leaves, I was telling God, what am I going to do with my life? Yeah, I felt very empty. I felt like, is this all there was to my life? Just getting up, job. I just had a baby. I felt very empty. Long story short, during that maternity, I was like, God, is this it? Like, I'm tired, I'm empty. And he asked me, what do you know how to do? And I laughed and I said, I know how to sleep because I really love to sleep. Like, if there was a competition for sleep, I'm sure that Africa, that would be one place where we'll be on the world map. Yeah, so I said I love to sleep, and he just kept quiet on me. And I'm like, oh, sorry, 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 I'm kidding, I'm kidding. And then I'm thinking about what I really know how to do. And I couldn't find anything. I'm like, I love my laptop. I just know how to work. I love my laptop. And then I'm like, oh, I know how to give birth to children in the US back to back. And then he goes, so turn that into a business. I'm like, you're kidding, right? Like, that sounds so scamish. And this is, by the way, just to give us context, this is 2010. At this time, when people want to go have their babies in the US, you would say you're not pregnant, you would wear a big boo. And I'm like, God, why are you telling me to go into that kind of thing? And he says, you show them how to do it the right way. Okay. So I started it out because at this point where I was getting this instruction, interestingly, I look back at my office, and before I had my first son, nobody had had their babies in the US. And then all of a sudden, at this time, God is telling me, turn this into a business. I look back and about 16 babies had been born. And essentially, it is, oh, Iphie, how did you do it? Tell me. And when I learn something, I think this is me. When I learn something, I want to tell the whole world. I want to help the whole world. I want to teach the whole world. And so I'd helped people. It was not prohibited as long as you had your doctor, you had your medical arrangements in place, you had your housing, you had your money, and you had proof. And so I started telling people, yes, you go to the embassy and you tell them this is what you're going to do. You have all your documentation. It got to a point the embassy had to ask somebody, we keep seeing letters from this organization. Who are they? What do they do? It's interesting how people are now beginning to say the truth. We grew over the years and then something switched. So while at first I started it because, yes, it was a God idea, it was a God instruction, I was happy to share. There was a lady that reached out to me and she was going to have a baby. She was actually referred by a client. And then I had a conversation with her. And then long story short, she said she didn't come back. And the lady, after a couple of months, the person that referred her called me one day and was crying, and she said the lady died. The lady was trying to have her baby. It was a CS. They gave her an overdose of anesthesia, and this lady died. And I cried. And so things shifted then. And I remember when I started the business and I didn't use my real name, I was so worried about people knowing, oh, it was Iphie, or so it was a big risk. But at that point, something just shifted. And I'm like, you know what? I don't care anymore. This is what I'm called to do. And if people not knowing who the real person is might stop them from going ahead, this is me. Yeah, this is me. Thank you very much. And so we pushed out, we launched out. That business ended up helping over 500 people have their babies in the US. And one thing that really gives me joy, it's not by where they went to. I just purely count it as the grace of God. We lost no more. We ended up also beyond that, also even working with the UN, UNDP, USAID, and actually did work in the IDP camps in northern Nigeria. So internationally displaced people's camps in northern Nigeria, gave them birthing kits to help childbirths to be more hygienic, things like that. Really the start of my purpose work, yes. And I think one thing that's very important to state here, I always have to really ensure people are clear. At the time I was running this business, and even for me as a person to go have my baby in the US, what was the key driver? It was the maternal mortality rate. Nigeria as a country had the highest maternal mortality rate in the world at that time. And it wasn't about whether you were wealthy or whether you couldn't afford. Even in the private hospitals, people were dying, and it it was just a different causes. So for me and for the people that were looking out for it, it was really for access to better health care.
It's very important that you provided that context because this particular conversation, of course, is particularly focused on West Africa. So sometimes the additional clarity as to the nuances that apply to the geography would provide clarity for the conversation in terms of why this is a big deal. I'd like you to delve deeper into that in terms of how you integrate your faith into your career journey so far, the entrepreneurship part of your journey, and also your purpose work. And the first area I'd like you to expand this question is what you achieved as a first time C-suite member before you transition to the not-for-profit or international development space. I'd like you to talk us through that journey. So yes, the in the introduction, you talked about how the numbers were mind blowing. Can you talk us through the journey? How did that happen? The people you worked with, the leadership lessons you learned from that. So, because sometimes it's easy for us to talk about or to showcase the results, but where the real learning is in the process. You were a first time C suite executive, it was an industry that you were not familiar with, and you achieved that kind of number. So, I believe that there's a lot of learning that can be mined from talking through the journey and the process that led to the outcome.
It was a very interesting journey. There was a head of marketing role. Remember, I was senior marketing manager at this time. There was a head of marketing role. A recruiter reached out to me. I applied for the role. I got into the interviews. They were looking at innovation. I hadn't really done a lot of innovation in terms of launching new products in my career. So I told a friend who I know was interested. I'm like, hey, you've done lots of innovations. You're looking for this kind of person. She's like, oh, no, if you're interviewing for it. I'm like, hey, I don't think I'm going to get it. And I think you're better suited. And she did get the role. But because I had gone through the interview process and they felt I was interesting, they said, you know what, though they're taking this person, they would share my resume with other MDs in the group. I didn't know that the chief commercial officer role for CAP was open and they had been looking for someone for about a year. I didn't know. So I'm having the conversations of marketing, and then they're just blown away by the fact that on marketing sales, so long story, I landed the CCO role. Every role I take on, no matter what, I always go back to God. I do like a retreat. Like, what are you telling me on this role? What do I need to do? But that one was it was bigger. It was literally like, you know what, God, if I could do 1 month with you. So when I went into my retreat with him, yes, he gave me a word, and I would share like how those things came to life. So the word he gave me was, I have the mind of Christ, and as I broke the word, it was talking about the mind of Christ and whatever the creative power of Christ, the dunamis power of Christ, and he was fleshing it out for me. So as you go into this role, you have the mind of Christ. You know what to do. You know what to create. You know how to create it. You have the power. I didn't understand, but I took the word. And so when I started the role, I had gone, met people, looked at everything. Remember, it was an industry that I had no clue, I'd never worked in. Even their sales model was different from the sales model that I had used or done in my FMCG world. So coming in, everything was new. So after I'd done all the discussions with the people, met partners and all that, I go back to God and I say, okay, you know what? This is what I've seen. This is what, at that point, the business was 8.7 billion in Naira. There was going to be a measure that would take them to about 9 point something billion. The target for that year was 12.5 billion. They wanted to grow 50%. Even the team felt the organization was hallucinating, like 50%. Are you kidding me? We've always grown an average of 5% every year. But by the time I spoke with the people, I really saw opportunity. And I think that's one thing I'm really grateful to God for. I see opportunities. And by the time I sat down and I was talking to God, so what am I doing on this role? What do you need me to do? And he asked me, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to double the business. And he said, okay, what would that be? And I said 8.7 times 2, so that's 17.4 billion. And he goes, round it up. And I say, oh wow, okay, 17.5 billion. And then he goes, no, round it up. I'm like, okay, 18 billion. And he keeps quiet and he says 20. And I'm like, huh? Like I'm using all the faith in me to go, like, I want to do double. Now you're taking me to 20. And that became our number. And so I went back, I asked him, like, okay, going through, and people always ask me, I think the Holy Spirit is a lot more than we think he is. And a lot of times we feel God doesn't understand my business. God doesn't know the work I do. He knows everything. And so I'm like, okay, how are we going to do this 20 billion? And from the things that I had done the research, he just starts going, if you do this, if the core business grows by 40%, if you open up XYZ number of stores, if your business in the coatings grows like this, I do the total, it's 20 point something billion. So I'm like, okay. So I go back and put together my one-page document on my strategy. I share it with my leadership. When I was leaving, my GMD told me that when he saw it, he just really told himself, okay, this girl is really mad. But then I deployed it to my team and we started the journey. Not everybody believed, obviously, from when I shared it. Somebody actually told me I was brainwashing them and it had never been done. But because I got it from a certain place, I really believed. And then I just kept pushing them and driving those key levers. And at the end of the second year, 23 months later, we actually had done 20 billion. And by the time I was leaving, it was more. And oh, by the way, 20 billion wasn't just 20 billion a number. 20 billion, God needed me to go into that place and really change the mindset of people, and for them to believe in themselves, for them to be more confident in their output, for them to really come alive. 20 billion meant that the business would have doubled, so would have profits, and so salaries would be increased. There were more opportunities. People got promoted. So for me, whilst 20 billion years was the number we had discussed, what he was showing me and the things that kept me moving was the things that 20 billion could do, what a business at 20 billion could do, the level of impact that it would make, the number of jobs it would create. That was what really kept me moving. So with regards lessons learned, I think a couple of them. One big one for me is especially when we move from functional leadership into C-suite. Essentially, what has happened is that you move from functional leadership into business leadership. The terms and the language that used to get you support as a functional leader. So for me, I was coming from sales and marketing. When you talk revenue, everybody's really excited. People get it. If you are a finance person, you talk maybe, profit and certain things, people are already excited in your space. If you're a manufacturing person, you're talking reliability and then downtime. People in your space are getting excited. When you come into C-suite, it totally changes. You need to learn to speak the language of the piper that plays the tune or pays for the tune to be played. And for me, when you get into C-suite, it's actually the board or your investors or whoever is really your boss at that time. And so I had to learn that when I'm coming with an ask, the first time I went with an ask, I was very excited. Can't you see the billions and everything? And the question was, so Ifeoma, what does this mean for us when it comes to bottom line? And then I understood that profit was the language that they spoke. And so when I came with any ask, even though it's a commercial ask to drive revenue or to drive, awareness or to drive engagement or to drive, participation or whatever I want to do, I always speak it from the language that my investors understood, which was profit. And that's how I got a lot of support, even up to people decisions. Things that needed to be done for the people, I would always tie it to what it would do, to what was important to them. So that was the first lesson that I learned. The second lesson that I learned, remember when I told you I actually was born, raised introverted. And as a person, I'm not very confrontational. I don't like confrontation. I like peace. I like things to go well. I easily let go of stuff for the sake of peace. But one thing I learned in that role was that as a leader, your people depend on you. And a lot of times, even till today, they tease me and say, they call me L&D because I used to say lives and destinies. Lives and destinies are dependent on the decisions you make. And so I learned to be more, I had to be an assertive leader. I had to learn to not just let go of things that I, Ifeoma, ordinarily would have let go, but think about it through the eyes of my people. My people were counting on me to go in there and bring this out for them. I couldn't fail them. And if I needed to grow as a person to be able to do that, I needed to do that. And that meant even me growing as a person, becoming bolder, becoming more audacious, becoming less afraid of confrontation. And so that I had to learn as well. And a lot of the things I went in and came out, as you do those things, it builds your people's trust in you, your people's confidence in you. It actually makes your people go all out for whatever is important for you. So when I think about the results that we achieved, my team was always about, anything if he says, don't worry, we'll do it. So I deploy a number. My team tells me from the beginning of the month, it's done. And honestly, it's done. So that was the second lesson I also learned. But the third lesson, I learned that when you grow into this kind of roles, a lot of times you may be misunderstood. A lot of times things would happen that you cannot essentially share the context with your people. And so you need to also have inner validation. You can't always depend on external validation. And that goes back to, for me, my core with God and still getting advice, wisdom on what is the right thing to do, even if the world will not understand it, even if my team will not understand it at that point. What's the right thing to do? How do I go about it? And even up to things like, I'm trying to grow a particular person, or I even need to let go of a particular person. How do I go about it in a way that is kind, in a way that still protects the business, and in a way that I honestly can go to bed at night. So for me, that those were some of the lessons. There were tons of lessons. You need to listen. you come into a new role, you need to listen. You need to listen for not just the things that are said, but the things that are unsaid. You need to observe before you come with what you want to do and how you want to do. But in everything, honestly, just winning the hearts of your people, and being very clear and focused on where you're going to, and then building allyship as you're doing this would really most likely get you to the destination that you want.
I think I enjoy it when, as business leaders or as just leaders generally, I think we need to encourage more of talking about the process that leads to the outcome so people don't desire results without understanding the work. And the next takeout from this part of your, should I say, journey and testimony is the fact that faith is practical, it's real, it's not bogus, it's not ambiguous, it's not vague. It's not always logical. I can't guarantee you that it will always be logical, but it is definitely practical because when you said God said, increase the number. Not only did he give you the number, he gave you the strategy. You were talking about how he showed you the different touch points. Oh, this, you can grow this by 40%. So there was a roadmap. It didn't just stop at, okay, increase the number. And sometimes that's where we miss it as Christians. Okay, I have this. How? We have to form that habit of also asking the how. Okay, so how do I achieve this? Where it becomes embarrassing or it now starts looking bogus or it looks like it's just religion is, oh, God says we're going to triple this number. How? And then you're stuck like, I don't know how. It's just going to happen. The journey and the process is usually where the deep work happens. You said earlier that you don't like to be in the spotlight. A lot of what you have been doing now with your purpose work and even your work as a CEO has put you in a public leadership space. It's no longer hidden or private. Both your actual 9 to 5 career portfolio and your purpose work portfolios, all of them put you in a position of public leadership. You're leading women in different phases of their lives and their career and their leadership journey. So, what are the challenges that you have faced or you have navigated through that journey as a result of the position that you now occupy?
That's a very interesting one. I personally, as a person, right, it's hard for me to see challenges. I always see them as stepping stones and things I need to overcome. But I think one key thing with public leadership is the fact that you actually become larger than life, and people feel you have no flaws, no issues, no areas where you're struggling. And especially for a continent like Africa, they put you on a pedestal that is very close to God. And for me, I particularly struggle with that. I always like to be very clear on what God has used me to do in your life and where you should, how you should see me, and how you should still revere God and give Him all the thanks and give Him all the glory. So that's one place where people that know me know that I'm very clear on, oh my God, Iphie, I'm so grateful for you. You know, you helped me. And I'm like, let's give God all the glory. So that's one core thing. And I see it also in my career because, of course, you promote people, you do stuff, people come back and are telling stuff. I still tell them, you prayed for it and God just used me to answer your prayer. I I maybe because the kind of person I am, because there's how people place you on a pedestal. I don't want to contest with God, that's first. I also don't want to be placed at a point where I now become immune to feedback and growth. Because when you're placed literally like at God level, then there's everything, you're good at everything, and it's not true. I don't want to ever reach a point where I feel so full of myself and I forget where I'm coming from. And that's one of the challenges with public leadership in Africa, because if you're not careful, they make you lose track of who you really are, and then you could divert. I think for me, that's one of the biggest ones.
There's a tendency for a dangerous reverential position that people can tend to take when they feel like someone is impacting or blessing them. So it's always important to remind. I am always very clear when I'm talking to the people that I engage with, that, especially when it comes to purpose work, like you called it, that I guarantee you, I am just a privileged channel. I am definitely not the source. So it helps to keep, it's very important to stay grounded. So, do you have any last comments that you want to share as we wrap this up?
Last comments. I think for me, really, I know we talk about the whole essence of the conversations is really about risk. I just wanted to share one example that I'd learned earlier, and then we laced that on with just working with God. I remember when I started my career with P&G, with time I became an interviewer. And one of the questions that P&G usually asks is, tell me about a time where you had to make a decision and how did you go about making that decision? And there's never really any right or wrong answer. But as I became an interviewer, you just start to pick out things. When you're making a decision, you always have to weigh the pros and the cons. Do you do the detailed work in terms of understanding what is before you? How do you make the decisions? If I do A, what are the risks attached to this? If I do B, what are the risks attached to this? Are there ways to mitigate this risk and all that? The reason why I'm saying this is especially when we work with God. When you're working with God and how He works with you when you're a child is different when you're also growing to a man. He says, when I was a child, I thought like a child. You take milk, become a man. God starts to relate with you as a man. I also don't want people leaving this conversation feeling like, oh, when I'm faced with this, I just wait for the Holy Spirit to tell me what to do. You have your thinking faculties as well, and God expects us to use those things. A lot of times, Bible says we should come, let us reason together. A lot of the things I've been telling you about God said is really me going there to reason with Him. These are the things that I have seen. This is what I'm looking at. And then in those conversations, sometimes He points me to something that I may have missed or something that I didn't quite fully capture well, and helps me to ask me deeper questions in there. But you must come from a position of reasoning, at least have done some base work, that's why I shared that question about, tell me about a decision you've made and how you went about it. And for anyone listening as well, you can also go back and look at what are all the bad decisions that I made and what are all the good decisions that I made. How did the process happen when it was good and when it was bad? What could I have done better? It helps your own reasoning. And by the time you latch on the Spirit of God and you're walking with Him, you would, at the end, what the world will see as a risk would pan out to be something that really catapults you to the next level. What could have turned out to be a bad decision, just because of the way you're thinking, it allows God to work through you to get the required thing. So I think that for me, that's one thing I want to leave. I want people to understand that you still have responsibility in your growth and in your relationship and in your work with God. But definitely, once God gives you a word, and when you talked about it, a lot of times we get that word, this is what to do. We are so excited that we run along and we forget to ask the how. God is interested in also sharing with us the how and working with us in the daily work to bring it to pass. So I think for me, those are the big things I want to share. And I really wish everyone that's listening to this all the best as they grow in every area of their life.
Thank you so much, Ife. This has been a really good conversation, a great one, I'll say. And there's a scripture that came to my mind. It's Ephesians chapter 3, verse 20, the message translation. It says, God can do anything, far more than you could ever imagine or guess or request in your wildest dreams. He does it not by pushing us around, but by walking within us, His Spirit deeply and gently within us. So, to our viewers out there, and for those who are taking very bold and daring steps, I need you to understand that God is willing and able to exceed your wildest dreams. You are the one that just needs to believe and take the step of faith and go with Him. The outcome will always be beautiful. Thank you, everyone. It was really nice having this conversation, and thank you for listening. God bless you. Have a wonderful rest of your day or week.
Thank you for joining us. This episode of Reframed was brought to you by Ziwani, a community of business leaders who partner together to live out their kingdom calling in the marketplace within Africa. To know more about us, visit our website at ziwani.com. That's ziwani.com.